Purple Daily, meat and potatoes. Not just a deep dive, it's the deepest dive into Minnesota Vikings football.
That's exactly right. We're going to go behind the scenes. We go into the film room. It's Judd. It's Forno. It's Age. Meat and potatoes coming at you. But first, I want to talk about the exclusive personal injury law firm of Purple Daily, Meat and Potatoes as well. That is Nicolay Law. Nicolay Law knows that when you or a loved one is injured, ordinary life, it can come to a stop and things can get complicated. During that time, guess what's going to happen? Insurance companies are going to pressure you. They don't care if you get better. They don't care if your bills are piling up, and they don't care that you may not be able to work. But Russ Nicolay and his team at Nicolay Law, they do care. They've seen every play the insurance companies have, and they're going to make sure you get the compensation you deserve after an accident. So if you've been injured, get Minnesota's local award-winning injury lawyers. Just get Nicolay. Start your path to winning at nicolaylaw.com. Or give them a call, 1-855-NICOLAY, 1-855-NICOLAY, Nicolay Law, NICOLET.com. All right, speaking of playbooks, Tyler Forness, and knowing every play, the Vikings coming off a win over the Cardinals on Sunday, their fifth consecutive win. I want to get in, because you just got done watching the film, I want to get into with you what you saw the difference offensively was, first of all, between the first half in which the Vikings really couldn't get on track, got a couple of field goals, had 6 points, very underwhelming, and then a second half in which they certainly came back and put together a fourth quarter, especially some nice drives. Sam Darnold doing a very good job. What was the main thing that stood out to you on film about that?
So it was interesting watching the film because your live viewing was, man, like, my number one takeaway was Nick Rallis is kind of the new age Mike Zimmer, where he's got a lot of creativity. He's maximizing talent from dudes who honestly shouldn't be starting. And we know Rallis got his start with Mike Zimmer. I believe it was the 2017 season after Rallis graduated from the U of M. Gannon got his start with Mike Zimmer as well. And then that's how Gannon ended up bringing Rallis to Philly with him, because Zimmer told him, hey, you're going to like this guy. So having that, like, Rallis just confused the Vikings. They did a lot of safety rotations. They run a lot of two-man. Like, the Vikings see the most two-man in the National Football League, according to Fantasy Points data, which is a tremendous resource to have. But not only do they run a lot of cover two, but they were running a lot of Tampa two. And then they were also showing two and then rotating to cover one or cover three and doing a lot of these interesting things with these three safety looks in a different way than how the Vikings use their three safety looks. And I think that element was really, really intriguing, and it kind of confused Sam Darnold a little bit. Because remember, if it takes you an extra half second to realize something in the pocket, that can be an eternity. So they confused him. He wasn't necessarily as comfortable with what he was seeing. I noticed a couple times where, like the Aaron Jones fumble, they were running Mills. So, it was Dagger. Mills and Dagger are very similar concepts, but Trent Sherfield's running an inside post and Jefferson was running a dig behind it. Both were wide ass open, but he chose to throw short. And I think some of that confusion early on in the game might have led to that trepidation and might have just led to, we've also been talking, he needs to be more willing to take a check down. I think he throws that post in week 3 or 4. And I think it ends up being a massive gain. But when you want a guy to play more calculated and smarter, sometimes you're going to miss out on a deep opportunity or two. So it's an opportunity cost. And we can argue whether that's good or bad on an overall scale, because he's making smarter decisions overall. But I think you lost out on an explosive in that realm. So kind of using all of this information, one of the big things that I thought they did in the second half was, one, their protection got their stuff together. The pass protection for some of these exotic blitzes that Rallis was calling was poor. It's really tough because, like, last year, Brian Flores ran that Bengal Hawk where wherever the center turned, those two guys dropped. So you had like Harrison Smith dropping into coverage regularly because you want to overload a side and make those pass protection rules work against the team. And Rallis did a great job of that, got 3 sacks off of it, and they kind of figured it out middle of the third quarter, and then they were protecting. And they were also, able to find like flat routes. They were able to find Like, just make things happen and make things happen quicker. I thought Sam Darnold did a great job of working on time, where he's dropping back in the pocket, sets that hitch, and then fires. He's not like double or triple hitching, waiting for guys to get open. He's making concrete, concise decisions, and they're working out really well. Go ahead, AJ.
Do you think that one of the main reasons, and you kind of mentioned this, was the Cardinals defense had the Vikings number in the first half? And I know on the TV broadcast, they mentioned that the Vikings lead the league in one read passing route or passing plays. Do you think that kind of plays a factor where maybe it's not predictable, but you're expecting them to throw to one guy when you get maybe a certain look? Do you think that makes it easier for opposing defenses to scheme and make them have to adjust like we saw in the second quarter, even though obviously you're saying much didn't change, but they eventually caught on and were able to kind of find more success as the game drawn on?
Let me ask you guys this, because I think this is a really interesting talking point, AJ.
Yeah.
Do either of you have a problem with the Vikings being number one in the league in first read targets? Does that concern you at all?
Given their current circumstances, no.
I think maybe that could be an issue more in the playoffs, but right now against the string of opponents we've seen, probably not. If
we're talking about J.J. McCarthy 2 years, 3 years in, then it probably does.
See, here's kind of the way I look at it. You have the best receiver in football, and you have a guy who may go down as the greatest receiver to ever play football in Justin Jefferson. Starting to realize that's a possibility, I don't think is crazy right now. I think it's okay that your first read has that high of a percentage. And to be fair, they didn't give the percentage. They didn't say how far away they were from other teams or whatnot. But having guys like Jefferson, Addison, and Hawkinson at your disposal, whoever that first read ends up being, I don't really see that as a bad thing. I actually see that as a plus. It's how is your impact and effectiveness once you have to get off that first read. I think, to me, that is the most important element of this conversation, because if you want to be able to hit your first read every time, that's the whole goal of the offense, to make things easy, to have the players to be able to get open every single time, have the quarterback to be able to see that and be able to fire. To me, having a high first read percentage isn't really a big deal. How impactful are you once you get off that first read is what separates good from great quarterbacks. To me, that's going to be the most telling part of it. So I don't even read into that very much. And what I really saw from Darnold, to kind of because we're talking about a bunch of different things here, so I'm going to kind of go piece by piece. I think Darnold over the last few weeks has done a phenomenal job in progressing through his reads, where he was not doing that earlier on in the season. And by progressing through his reads and making better decisions, and he has that comfort in the pocket, which he's had all year, which is kind of crazy to think about, because he was not comfortable in the pocket his entire NFL career. And he's making good decisions. He's being able to see the field better. Odie, you're fine. My wife just got home.
Oh, poor Odie.
Oh, he's good. He's going to go get pets. It's all fine. But being able to have some of those things, I think is really important for Darnold. And when we're talking about making some of these adjustments and being comfortable in the pocket, because you know what? You get sacked 3 times on those kind of zero blitzes where you really don't have an opportunity to be able to throw the ball down the field and be able to hit your receivers because there's a guy in your face right away. To continue to have that kind of confidence in your offensive line to be able to figure it out, which they did, and to have the confidence in your receivers and the adjustments that Kevin O'Connell made later as a play caller to attack some of these things, I thought was really, really important and really crucial to the Vikings getting this win. And adjustments are one of the biggest things in football. And so many have talked about it, and I think it deserves mentioning here. The Vikings really don't know what they're going to see from teams when they face them, because of how good Justin Jefferson is and what kind of gravity he requires as just a wide receiver, because they're throwing different things at the Vikings that they have never shown on film because of Justin Jefferson. And I think that is one of the big reasons why the Vikings offense has shown periods of struggle, especially early in games, because against the Titans, they struggled early, but then they rattled off a bunch of points, 123-13. Against the Cardinals, they struggled early. Then they rattled off 17 points at the end to win. Against the Colts, they struggled early, but then they rattled off 3 straight touchdowns. I think those factors and those adjustments are a bigger story to me than what their struggles have been offensively, because it's so hard to prepare when you don't know what they're going to throw at you, because they're so different from everybody else.
So what the Cardinals did too, and Jefferson actually talked about this post game, and it's really intriguing. Is for 3 consecutive games, you had teams basically do something outside of their ordinary comfort zone to shut down Jefferson. Jefferson said, and I think he said something at halftime about this, and it probably makes a lot of sense. Jefferson said the Cardinals weren't doing that. They were presenting other looks to try to confuse Darnold, but they were not nearly as intent on doubling him. And I saw you tweeted certain plays out as well, Tyler, where he is clearly open. Now was Darnold confused at times? Absolutely. Was the offensive line not great at times? Absolutely. But I think that the thing that I really liked about the Vikings adjusting things was to open then the second half. What's the first play of the third quarter? It's a deep shot for Jefferson that is incomplete but draws an immediate flag. And so in the context of like a playoff game where teams are going to try to confuse you, present you looks that you have not seen, very smart to like try to screw with the quarterback and say, oh, okay, they're now expecting everyone to do this to Jefferson. And by the way, the Bears game scares you because everyone else beat you, not Jefferson. So I do think the fact that the Vikings had the ability to go in and say, okay, here's what we're going to do to combat that, calm things down a bit, is a really good coaching sign as well. Because we have certainly seen offensive-minded coaches who don't know how to alter things at all in game. And this was the difference of that. And what I really liked, too, was the fact that win was a grinded-out win. Like, that was not an aesthetically pleasing game. The fourth quarter was fun. The rest of it was not. But you still got the win. And at the end of the day, Justin Jefferson still had a very nice day. So kudos to the Vikings for getting him involved and for figuring it out and not spending 4 quarters saying, oh, boy, haven't seen this before. I really thought that was, at the end of the day, credit to the Vikings.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I think people don't talk about enough when it comes to this whole one-score game malarkey that we're going to continue hearing about, Kevin O'Connell's 24-9 in one-score games. He only has six wins. So he's 6-7 in games that aren't decided by one score, which honestly, I don't think really means anything. We know how bad some of those losses were in the 2022 season. And we had some rough points in the 2023 season with having to play the 4 quarterbacks. But I think so many teams win in the margins. And it's not a bad thing that you're winning one-score games, and especially when you look at the context of one-score games. Yep. I didn't buy into the argument that the Vikings were completely fraudulent in 2022. I thought that they weren't quite as good as their record. But at the end of the day, they had 13 wins, and they earned those wins. Now, were some of them a little fluky or lucky? Sure. You get a couple bounced your way, but you have to be able to take advantage of them. And the Vikings did with consistency. This year, they're winning one-score games, but they're fake one-score games. That game against the Packers never had a chance to take the lead after 10 minutes of the game. The win percentage didn't dip below 80% until midway through the fourth quarter, and then it spiked right back up into the 90s. Against the 49ers, they went up 9 with less than 2 minutes to go, and the 49ers got a field goal to make it a one-score game. Fake one-score game. You know what's a real one-score game? The Jaguars game. That was always a one-score game. That was always competitive throughout. Those are the games that you need to win on the margins. Those are what we should be looking at. And it's always going to be context. Context matters. And you know what? Kevin O'Connell utilizing some of these things and listening and making those adjustments. And I thought one of the things that they did in the second half, we're going to talk about a couple plays that I thought really stood out, but they ran a lot more cover 2 beaters. So when you talk about beaters, it's play concept specifically meant to put the defense in conflict based on the coverages that they're using. So they're doing a lot of spot dropping. So spot dropping is essentially when you are dropping into zone and you're dropping to a spot. You're not necessarily man matching. You're not necessarily following a receiver. You're going to a spot. The pivotal 4th down play where Justin Jefferson basically just runs like a 10-yard hook route. Guess what? Spot drop. The reason why that worked is because they weren't paying attention to the receivers. They were watching the quarterback's eyes and dropping to a spot. Darnold fires it in, has a good window, first down, easy money. The one other hook route that Justin Jefferson ran that they threw to, he climbed back to the football, something that a lot of receivers don't do with consistency. It's one of the things that separates him from other really good receivers because he does all the little things. He has this great talent, but he does the little stuff, the blocking earlier in the game too. And he climbs to the football, catches it. If he doesn't, that's either an interception or a pass breakup. Like, they utilize these beaters, and they ran dagger, that 25-plus yard route to Jordan Addison. It was just a 25-yard dig. Like, we're not reinventing the wheel here, but they're utilizing these things to be able to attack down the field, and they're attacking the coverages because they kind of had a feel for what Rawls was calling, and sometimes you need a little bit of time. Being able to have that coaching acumen to adjust and adapt is what separates the Vikings from other teams, because they have that ability to coach. O'Connell's an elite play caller. I'm going to keep spouting it until people actually start believing it. If you're mad about something not working, you're more mad about the execution than the play call. Because if it works, you're like, oh, that's great. Great play call. Great play call. I think O'Connell does a great job day in and day out, game in and game out, play in and play out. And we saw it in the second half in droves.
And let me ask you about that, because you mentioned that that fourth down play to Justin Jefferson and how that was drawn up. Was that based on, do you think, solely from stuff they learned and pieces of information they took from that Cardinals defense as the game progressed? Or was that something you think they could have maybe gone to earlier in the game to generate a little offense, but maybe just were opting to save it for when they desperately needed it, because maybe it's a one-time use type of play? You're
not going to like this answer, AJ, but I don't know.
That's fine. I would rather you be honest with me, Tyler. I'd rather you be honest.
Absolutely. And that's I try to use that as my trademark. It's so hard to be able to answer that because there's so many things that go into how somebody will scheme up plays and when they will call them, because you want to save stuff for the end of the game. You don't want to empty the holster early, because then you'll have nothing to fall back on later, because they've already seen it. When they've seen the look, guess what? They may recognize the look, and then that's when trouble happens. So let's talk about kind of how Kevin O'Connell went back to the well. Early in the game, they ran with what a lot of people call double sevens. So if you remember the Minneapolis Miracle, the Buffalo Right 7 Heaven. So they ran like a shorter flat route, and then they ran two deep verticals. So they crossed those verticals with the scissors concept in the Minneapolis Miracle, where Jarius Wright crosses over Stephon Diggs to try and create some confusion. Well, here you have Addison running a shorter corner route and Jefferson running deep. Early in the game, they missed it. They weren't able to hit it. But what they had earlier was a corner was sitting in that flat. And having a corner there makes it a lot harder to be able to get it over the top, because corners are going to be able to play the pass theoretically significantly better than a linebacker. They're going to be able to read it quicker. They're going to be able to react quicker, and they're going to be able to attack the ball with more efficiency. So they went back to the well in the fourth quarter. I believe the score at that point was 19-6. So early on in the fourth quarter, around the same area. So like that 30 to 40 yard line. And they attacked it. Why did they attack it again? O'Connell mentioned the fact that he saw there was a linebacker in that flat area instead of a corner. So he's like, okay, we can attack this. And Alec Lewis asked him about it. He tweeted about it a couple times, and he was 100% right. It was a gorgeous throw. And Darnold just layers it perfectly over the linebacker, and then it's an explosive. And you continue to build momentum, and you gain a ton of yards. You get into the red zone, and the Vikings are able to score on that drive. Those little nuances, those adjustments kind of layer into everything we just talked about. If you see them changing something, how are you going to adapt and attack it? And that's why seeing it throughout the game, and why the Vikings are so much more explosive at times in the second half than the first half, to me is less concerning than it would be for other teams. If this was happening to, let's say, the Bears or the Packers, where they're duds in the first half and explode in the second half, it's like, well, why aren't you figuring it out in the first half? Like, you're probably going to see a lot of similar looks to what others have seen on film. Whereas, Judd, you mentioned it, last three games, they have done things completely differently because of Justin Jefferson. I think with this Vikings team, you can be more okay with more success in the second half because of that. Because you don't know, they're going to throw you some weird stuff. And you know what? Nick Rawls did. Nick Rawls called a phenomenal game for the Cardinals. Problem was that they didn't have quite enough in the holster of unique looks, because when they sent, I think it was on that fourth down play, they sent an exotic blitz, and Darnold hit it perfectly. They blocked it well enough, which the offensive line had some blocking misses, and the protection rules got manipulated by Rawls, which all the credit to the Cardinals there. They don't have as much talent on the defense as that performance would say they do. Just incredible stuff. Like, I love watching defensive football. It's beautiful. But when you're able to see what they're giving you and adapt and adjust on the fly, because sometimes you don't have certain plays that you've practiced throughout the week because you don't know that they're going to give you stuff. They do a lot of interesting stuff with those three safeties in a different way than the Vikings. But because of that, then you got to see throughout the game, okay, they're doing this, they're doing that. When you see this, watch for this rotation. And then that's when things started to really click. That's when things started to attack down the field. And I think that's a big reason why the Minnesota Vikings were able to win this game.
Awesome stuff. Some meat and potatoes questions coming up from listeners next. But first, I want to talk about, speaking of meat and potatoes, our friends at Butcher and the Boar in the North Loop in Minneapolis, a gathering space for Southern-style hospitality, great for family and business gatherings. And I want to talk to you about their prime rib night, which is every Thursday night. Comes with a wedge salad, lobster mac and cheese, loaded baked potato, and an ice cream sundae. I'm going to tell you right now, this is big enough for two, or at least an offensive guard type of meal, served until it is sold out. Happy hour 4 to 6 every day. Brunch on the weekends. Butcher and the Boar in the North Loop. All right, Age, let's get to it. Let's get to the meat and potatoes questions.
Yeah, first one here comes from B Shaker 1188 on YouTube. He says, KOC needs to incorporate the quick pass and slants into the playbook more often, and also get Sam rolling out more to avoid the pass rush. He's been saying this for so long. Opposing teams attempt to do this to the Vikings all the time. My question to you, Forno, based off this is, do you agree? Why or why not?
It's a tough one.
Okay.
I think that they should have more hot routes available, but to just add like a lot of those kind of like samey kind of concepts, I think may not be the best option. It's a really complicated question because the idea of hitting the easy button is a good thing, and I think the Vikings hit the easy button quite a bit. All those like play action rollouts, sort of tight end, get 15 yards. You can only hit that kind of stuff so often, and let's just be real. It doesn't feel like it. The Vikings have a great offensive line. Like, they have holes, they had issues, but it's also really hard to find good offensive linemen because there are only so many guys who weigh 310 pounds who are great athletes, who have enough strength in that frame in order to be able to play this kind of position. So how the Vikings have played, and like, I don't love ESPN's blocking win rate metrics, but they're third in pass block win rate, which is measured by how long you sustain your blocks. And it's over 70%. That's pretty dang good. Like, I'll take that any day of the week if you are among the league leaders in a metric like that. And I think it's 7th or 5th or 9th, something like that, in a run block win rate too, which is also awesome. But you have to be able to sustain those blocks, which they are. And you have to be able to get to those options in the flat, which I think Darnold has done a much, much improved job of, being willing to take like just the easy one, being willing to just run instead of always trying to attack down the field. The turnover worthy plays have gotten significantly less over the course of the past few weeks, which is awesome to see. Like, the idea of just hitting like stick and just hitting like slants and stuff, I think is a little bit too simplistic. But the fact that they're willing to throw the ball short more, and the fact that they're willing to hit that easy button, like, I think they're doing just fine. Sometimes with exotic blitzes, they just manipulate your rules in pass protection, and you have to adapt to that, which can be very difficult for an offensive line to do. And I don't really have a problem with how they're attacking down the field, because you know what? It's working, and it's working a lot, and it's working consistently. Like, have maybe a little bit more of a hot route option to be able to kind of alleviate some of that. But in reality, I just don't think just adding a bunch of like slant flat concepts is going to make this offense better. It's honestly probably just going to frustrate people even more.
Next one comes here from Noah Dolan 2871 on YouTube. And if you do want your question asked, leave it in the YouTube comments or email into pdmeatandpotatoes@gmail.com. He says, cheers, fellas. Happy Kirk Cousins week. What a week it would be if he plays himself into getting benched after this week. What does Brian Flores need to focus on the most that gets the Vikings to not only get some revenge, but also try to replicate that 4-interception performance that we saw this past weekend in the Falcons' loss?
Blitz, blitz, blitz.
You're
Don't let
speaking
Cousins,
Brian Flores' language now.
don't let Kirk Cousins sit in the pocket and find open receivers. Blitz him to oblivion because you know what? He can't move. He just cannot move the same after that Achilles. It's better than it was earlier in the year, but it's not good. Blitz him to oblivion, make him adjust in the pocket, make him try to escape the pocket, and just create havoc. That's in my opinion the best way to beat Kirk Cousins. Blitz him to oblivion and make him make super quick decisions and make him move, because I think that's going to be your best route. There's talk from people like that I've seen, they like Falcons fans want Kirk benched. They want Penix. And yep. I didn't think it would happen this quickly, but 6-6, I've had a couple Falcons fans reach out to me. They're like, Tyler, how did you live with this for 6 years? I'm like, I was born into this, man. I was born with Brad Johnson as my quarterback. I saw Matt Castle, Tavares Jackson, Christian Ponder. Kirk was like, it was a lot easier to deal with than some of the other stuff that we've dealt with as Vikings fans. Like, this is a 500-ish quarterback. He's going to play well enough within the offense with the people he has around him, and he's not going to elevate a ton. And that's where you have a difference between like 11-6 versus 9-8. Like those two wins make a really big difference, especially when you're talking about the NFC right now. I just think you got to blitz Kirky to oblivion and make him beat you quickly. Kind of the plan they used against Justin Herbert, except Justin Herbert just torched the Vikings. I think you have to use that same plan.
Okay.
I think that the difference too is, one is it looks like Kirk can't plant. Like a lot of his throws just look like he can't plant. His problem is I don't know if this Achilles is another year going to do the trick. I mean, I think Rodgers is cooked. But he's also 40. Kirk's not that old. He's 36 years old. So yeah, it's going to be very interesting because if he has another bad game, you almost could bench him under the guise of he's just trying to play hurt. Like it's just, he looks like a guy. I mean, if he can't throw the ball with effectiveness, he's of no use. So, and the Falcons, I mean, this will remain one of the greatest mysteries when it comes to the marriage of free agency and the draft of all time. What they were exactly thinking, what might have changed after they signed Kirk. Like it is a big, big mystery. But if anyone knows Kirk's tricks, it's going to be the Vikings. So I actually love this. And if you could tell me right now that you were going to face Atlanta in a playoff game with Kirk starting, sign me up. Sign me up. Because I got into a debate with a couple weeks ago with Mackey and Declan Forno about would you prefer to go play the Cardinals in Arizona with Kyler or Kirk in Atlanta? I said, sign me up for Atlanta every single time because Kyler's a wild card. I like Kyler. I mean, Kyler, I'm not saying he's the most consistent in the world, but he has a toolkit that scares me, especially in a one-game playoff. Kirk is a toolkit that I understand completely, and two, in a playoff, yeah, you know what? I'll take my chances in a playoff game against Kirk Cousins every single time.
Mm-hmm. And that defense in Atlanta can't generate a pass rush. They just can't. They have
their 8th overall pick on a pass rusher.
Look, I didn't theoretically using the 8th overall pick on Michael Penix Jr. isn't necessarily a bad thing. I had him as a second round guy, but doing that in that situation was it was the wildest draft pick I think I've ever seen.
Yep.
And the only other wild draft pick I can ever remember was the Raiders took a second rounder in safety and Mike Mitchell 10, 12 years ago. That Mel Kiper's I had this guy as an undrafted player. What are the Raiders doing? And he ended up playing a dozen years in the league. But it's Penix is good, but doing so when you have Kirk, there were rumors flying around. I don't know if it's true, but that they decided to draft him after he ran a 4.5 40. Which I just think is considering he was very mobile in his time in Indiana, but when he got to Washington, he had a couple ACL injuries before then. Right. He was basically a pocket passer. It's just funny, incredibly funny, but it also shows how desperate the Falcons are to get a franchise quarterback because they need one really, really bad.
Yeah. Absolutely. All right, sir. Great stuff. We'll talk to you after the Falcons game next Tuesday. 4-0. AJ, I'm Judd. We'll see you next week on Purple Daily. Meat and potatoes.